30 minutes starts now. Hey, what's up? Thanks for joining me. This is episode 5 of a show that I've been doing. This is not a high quality podcast. I don't even like to really call it a podcast because I think that most podcasts have better production quality. But this is a show nonetheless, and if you like podcasts, I hope that you're going to like this. It's a long format. It's a chance for me to kind of talk in a way that a lot of social media doesn't kind of allow. Facebook updates and yeah, tweets, Twitter messages. I don't know. I don't even know what my mouth is doing half the time. It's just it's got a mind of its own. Anyway, yeah, thanks for tuning into the show, and this is episode 5. I've got 4 behind me. That's how math works, right? And I think that so far the episodes I've been putting out have been a pretty good representation of me and kind of how I do things. Some of the episodes so far have been coming out later and later, and some of them can be a little bit rambly at times, and that's me. That's kind of how I am. Is that I'm always fighting against the clock, and I'm usually thinking of a lot of things, a lot of new ideas coming out of me. Things I don't do a lot is kind of go back and revisit things. I do have a tendency to kind of start stuff, but not always go back and finish it. So I thought that today might be a good balance if, number one, I'm trying to record this early so I can actually get it out on time. I thought that would be really refreshing. But number two, I thought it'd be really kind of refreshing if I just kind of go back a little bit and kind of reference some things that I've started, things that I've begun, and try to maybe give a little closure or wrap things up a little bit, or at the very least just kind of revisit some things that I've talked about in the past. For one, I want to talk about, I have a Facebook page called Do Not Read the Comments. It's where I post these episodes to, so that, if you're following along and you want to, see any of the past episodes, they're all in one place. You wouldn't have to look at my personal Facebook and scroll back through the history. You could just look at the Do Not Read the Comments page and go back through the history there, and you can see all the old episodes. I do post to that occasionally, and in one instance, a few weeks back, I posted an episode of the Joe Rogan podcast that I thought was relevant and interesting to me, and I said it was something that I wanted to talk about. So that was an interview. Joe Rogan was interviewing David Pakman on his show. Now, if you're not familiar with Joe Rogan, he interviews a lot of different people from a lot of different backgrounds, and part of the time it's political, but a lot of times he'll have people who are completely not related to any political, their career is not political at all. He's had scientists on, he's had people who are adventurers, go into jungles, or this one guy who set some record by hiking across Antarctica. So he gets a really wide cross-section of people, of guests on his show. He does also get sometimes political guests, people who are kind of like pundits. It could be in more traditional media, he's gotten some journalists on who write for major newspapers, or he has gotten people who just kind of have a podcast or a blog, or whatever the case may be. So he talks to a lot of different people of a lot of backgrounds. Because he talks to so many different people, I think that's got to be the reason why Joe Rogan really seems to care a lot about a particular thing that's going on in the political climate today, particularly as it involves social media. Because there's a word that gets thrown around called deplatforming. And if you're not familiar, deplatforming is kicking a person off of something like kicking them off of Facebook, kicking them off of Twitter, kicking them off of YouTube. It's a fairly severe penalty, and it gets discussed a lot because in many cases the reasoning for it is really lacking. Basically, there are some really good arguments that these private networks, and they are private, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, they are not publicly owned. They're not an extension of the government by any means. They're private companies, and all the employees working from are private employees. The feeling amongst some people, is that the rules are not handled evenly and fairly and transparently. And you would kind of hope that rules would have those qualities, that they would be transparent and they'd be fair. But often people feel that they're not. That things are kind of happening in the dark. And that's what a lot of discussion around, I guess, kind of like these issues of private censorship kind of come back to. And in particular, in the interview that I referenced, the David Pakman interview, Joe Rogan is kind of putting out there. It's not a new idea by any means, but it's something that he's just kind of putting into the conversation. Is that the actions taken by some of these social networks seem to have a political bias to them, and in this conversation, Joe Rogan takes the perspective that there is a bias, and David Pakman is arguing that there is not. And I don't think that it's a really serious debate, in that I think they kind of touch on it for a little while, but I don't think they aggressively argue whether or not it's political in nature. Like I said, David Pakman takes the stance that it's not, and Joe Rogan says that it is. But I think they kind of just meet in the middle long enough to talk about it, and then I think they kind of just go their own separate ways, not having changed their opinions much. And that might sound uninteresting. I disagree. I think that it was a pretty interesting conversation, and I don't I don't particularly seek out like the more aggressive debates. I feel like the people who really love debates, what they'd rather be watching is like a fist fight, or a boxing match, or something of a more visceral nature. Like I don't really understand when people really get like all excited for a debate, because to me it's like it's like looking at the Kmart underwear ads, for arousal, when you could instead be looking at like actual porn or something. I guess my point is that the kind of people I think who really enjoy like a aggressive debate, what you really want is you want to see two people dominating each other, in a violent and aggressive way. And it's like, well, that's what fighting's for. Like, why have a verbal fight? I think that verbal discussions are not meant to be a fight. I like the format of the Joe Rogan podcast because it's not aggressive. They're just talking, and I think that's how it really ought to be. So I guess my point is I don't really get the obsession that some people have with more formal debates and more aggressive debates. I think it's a kind of silly thing, but that's my opinion. Anyway, yeah, I think that podcast that I referenced earlier is a really great kind of discussion of deplatforming, and there's many others. If you watch enough Joe Rogan podcasts, you'll see he brings it up time and time again. And I kind of want to I want to have like a brief little intermission to kind of say something that. Although I think in some ways, 'cause here's what I'm doing right now. I'm aware that I kind of sound like a Joe Rogan fanboy because I'm Joe Rogan this and I'm Joe Rogan that and blah 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 blah. So I'm just gonna kind of acknowledge the elephant in the room. I really like his show a lot, and although I'm trying to kind of open up myself to more podcasts, to be honest, the more podcasts I listen to, the more I don't. The more I find ones that just are not that interesting to me, it kind of makes me appreciate his show more. Um, and I hope that I'm not convince anyone to not listen to podcasts. It's more the question of there's a lot out there, and it's worth taking your time and finding the ones that you like because there are so many to choose from, and also the barrier to entry is low. So yeah, there's going to be a lot of people making them. But I think it's a worthwhile pursuit to go out and listen to stuff and say, "Oh, this stuff is good," because why not? Why not go out and try to listen to new stuff? But I'm digressing a bit. Let's come back. Yeah, I like his show a lot. I like the Joe Rogan podcast. I do find myself, um, you know, listening to a lot of his shows, and I would say that in some small way, or I don't know, in some way, it has kind of inspired me to make these shows. But I definitely don't want to try to copy his formula or his success or anything. It's more of just kind of inspiring me, hey, you know what? It's kind of just getting people together and just turning on the camera and letting the mic roll and letting it go. It's a pretty good format, actually, compared to something that's a lot more produced and scripted, and there's a lot of stuff you'll find on YouTube that it's really obvious that they wrote a script and um, they spent a lot of time editing it, and it's really well produced. And I appreciate what they're doing, but I do like this kind of just let the tape roll and just kind of more authentic kind of stuff. So although I don't think that Joe Rogan is I don't think that he is my like goal, my end all be all for what I want to do as a creator. Um, I think in another show I'll talk more about what actually are my aspirations creating. Because I'll tell you this little show, this isn't it. This is just a simple thing for me to get started, kind of like some training wheels, kind of like a little warm up. This is uh, a warm up for me. But I do appreciate what he's doing, even if I don't want to be him. I really like what he's doing. So there. Now I appreciate Joe Rogan. Do with that information whatever you want. Let's get back to the fact that I've listened to a lot of his stuff, and he has brought up this issue time and again about deplatforming and censorship and things like that. There was a more recent episode that I listened to with a guy going by the name Hotep Jesus. Um, and it was an interesting conversation because I really liked what his guest had to say, which is basically about we really don't need to get so worked up about censorship and these issues with these platforms, because platforms come and go, and it's really just a matter of time before the next person makes the next successful platform. There are a lot of people building alternative platforms, alternatives to whatever network they're getting kicked off of. But I think the point that Hotep Jesus was trying to make is that the next successful platform won't really try to reproduce what the platforms are doing already. Like, it's not just going to be right-wing Facebook or left-wing Twitter or anarchist YouTube or whatever. It's not like just like take this thing and reproduce it perfectly with a slant, with a bias towards a group that is supposed to somehow balance out the bias of this other larger, more popular network. I think that I really have to agree with Hotep Jesus on it. Oh, that's fun. It's a fun phrase. I really agree with Hotep Jesus. I have to agree with him on this fact that it's not going to be carbon copies that are successful. It's going to be the ones that offer something new, offer something innovative, and offer something compelling. All right. So, I look back from my perspective because I'm a web developer and I know how to build these things. If I needed to build a Facebook clone, I could do it. Although, admittedly, it probably wouldn't be as full-featured as Facebook is right now. But, I could do something close to it. Facebook has a lot of people working on it, so give me a break, okay? But, I can build... I could build a social network if I had to, but it really wouldn't be worth anything if people aren't interested in it. And what he's getting at is that people are interested in something innovative, something fresh, something new, something that solves the problems that they have. And it's got to be more than just like, oh, I was booted off this network. All right. So definitely there's some social networks right now that are enjoying some success because some of the larger networks are kind of ramping up, like how many people they're displacing, and you've got kind of like these like social network refugees going somewhere. But I think that what's more likely is the social network that is more creative or just more innovative or just solving more problems. That'll be the one that takes some success. And, it all kind of remains to be seen how people feel about some of these issues. It is a little bit troubling when people are just really okay with a lot of censorship. The thing I think that Joe Rogan keeps coming back to, he's mentioned this before, is that like, okay, it starts today. We deplatform this guy because he made some just really ugly racist remarks, right? But then like the next week, it's like we get rid of this guy because he interviewed the racist guy, or we get rid of this guy because in his comments section somebody said something really racist and he didn't delete those comments, or somebody in the comments linked to some website by the racist guy. Or, you can just kind of see how it gets like 1, 2, 3, 4. It gets like additional steps away from the like purest form of the quote unquote evil, right? And I don't want to digress too much, but like I totally think that evil is a really abstract concept that like really depends person to person, and I think there's a lot of hubris in a company that says that it knows what evil is and it's going to right this in the world. I definitely think that not wanting to be evil and wanting to, you know, do good in the world. I think that those are really good aspirations, but I think that they're like a heading you set your compass on, but I think it's not a shore that anyone's ship ever lands on. You know what I mean? Like you try to be good, but you just do the best that you can. I think there's a lot of hubris in these companies and these individuals working for companies that say that they know what good and evil are and what speech is good and what speech is evil. It's a little troubling, you know, to see people so sure of this kind of stuff. And you know, I guess in some ways, this is the topic. You know, the whole like the way that people talk to one another, like the nature of dialogue. This is kind of like the kind of the big idea. It's something that Joe Rogan talks all about a lot of his podcasts, and it's something that's been coming up again and again in other places. In particular, there was one more link that I dropped on the Do Not Read the Comments Facebook page. That's from a YouTuber, Viva Frei, if I'm saying his name right. He's a lawyer out of Quebec, and I've been enjoying his videos lately as he kind of breaks down analysis of legal issues and kind of explains lawyerly things that I wouldn't normally understand. He talks about the Covington Catholic school incident, which some of you may or may not remember, kind of blew up and then quickly went away. But for about a week there, everybody everybody was kind of hot to share photos and videos of some kids wearing MAGA hats with like smug smiles on their faces and talking about what a terrible thing this is and terrible thing these kids are doing and they're terrible people and you know the typical internet pitchfork mob kind of stuff. And Viva Frei in his YouTube video, you know, kind of talks about how there was a whole lot of stuff said, and later it turns out like there was a story being made out of nothing. It was kind of a non-story whipped up into a story, and there was a combination of a lack of retraction and also kind of doubling down. Like, well, okay, so maybe those kids didn't do the thing that we accused them of, but they represent the evil that we're fighting against. So because I'm against that evil, what I said is okay. And yeah, you know what? I think I have to side. Not have to, but I think I really agree with the nature of Viva Frei's YouTube, which is just that like the the kind of dialogue that we're having is really breaking down, and it's kind of a sad state of affairs. The way we shoot first and ask questions later, if at all. And this, you know, this is a meme, I guess. This is a, you know, idea that I'm seeing again and again. Another one that I saw was a family member of mine posted this really great meme. It seems to be of an interview with the actor Gary Oldman. And in it, he's saying, just because I disagree with you, that does not mean I hate you. We need to relearn that in our society. And I really love that. I think it's a really great, succinct way of summing up the issue. I tried to say something on that topic to my personal Facebook feed. I tried posting something saying, you know, I try to think about what it'd be like, if I got some important topic wrong. Pick a topic that's contentious. Like I don't know, pick one. I don't want. I don't want to start. I don't want to start getting down the political path. But like, pick a highly controversial issue. And if I came to the conclusion like, oh, I really had that wrong, and now I want to change my opinion on this. What would I expect? Would I expect people to be like really forgiving to me, or would people be just like ready to, I don't know, humiliate me for having the wrong opinion, but I think my post kind of missed its mark because it's too many paragraphs, and the Gary Oldman quote, it's so short and beautiful and it works a lot better than my post is. But all of these things, right, like my post and Gary Oldman's quote and Viva Frei's YouTube video and Joe Rogan's many of his podcasts, they're all kind of revolving back around the same point of like having just a better form of dialogue, right? And being thoughtful. Like Joe Rogan has said a few different shows, I believe he said that like when he talks to someone that he disagrees with, he doesn't feel the need to shout them down because he wants to hear like their best version of what it is that they have to say. Because I think he's aware that like even if you're wrong about something, you can shout the other person down, you can nitpick things, you can do all these things before you ever really start to try to hear what they have to say. You can launch an offensive against their opinion before you even know what their opinion is. And his perspective seems to be like, I want to hear what you have to say so I can decide if there's any value to it or not. I think that's a really important thing, and I think that Joe Rogan is, how do I say this? I think he's justified in being concerned that if these networks where we have these discussions, if they all get sanitized, if they all get gentrified, if they all just kind of get cleaned up and you can't say this and you can't say that and you can't mention this person's name and you can't reference this thing and you can't make people feel uncomfortable about this or that, what we end up doing is we end up like not even knowing what are other people's opinions, and we don't even really know like what is it about this guy's opinion that sucks. You know what I mean? Like if it's a bad idea, you should be able to hear it so that you know why it's a bad idea. And unfortunately that's kind of an unpopular, I don't know if it's popular, but it's a, there's problems. How do I say this? There's a lot of challenges facing that kind of idea. The idea of like, let everybody talk so we can kind of hear what everyone has to say. That idea is kind of facing some danger on the internet and in society in general. Yeah, it's unfortunate, it's especially for a guy like Joe Rogan who, doesn't use his platform to push his agendas. He just kind of listens to a lot of different people and what they have to say. It's like after they get the extremists, then they come back and get the less extreme people, and at some point it's kind of his turn, to get censored. And that's unfortunate, but hopefully that there's enough innovation that by the time some of these old social medias have just kind of turned sour and full of censorship and stuff like that, Hopefully the next one, the next new fresh platform is ready to go, and that's where the exciting conversations can happen. So that's going to be it for me today. I thank you for tuning in, and look forward to doing this with you again. Thanks, and have a good weekend.